Democracy versus autocracy. Let's envision a hypothetical scenario in which a certain influential entity wants to covertly assume control of a democratic society. This malefactor could be a concealed powerful group or organization within the country or even a foreign power. They will try to use all their unlimited resources and influence to get over the legal system, economy, and media, all of which are interconnected. Now, consider this entity starting to support all the major political parties in the country, even those that seem to have conflicting ideals and goals. Gradually, they strip away their independence, replace the leaders, and manipulate the parties to serve their interests, influencing the parliament to introduce the laws that covertly serve their goals. It would be akin to playing a chess game against oneself. Under such management, the society, though resembling a democracy, would operate like in shadowy autocracy. This could even be replicated across various countries aiming to gain control of the entirety of world's nations. From the outside, they would appear as independent democracies, but in reality, they would be part of a vast, concealed autocracy. Who could halt this plan? Possibly only another entity with the same intentions and capabilities. Although, they might collaborate or the stronger one might subsume the others. Why embark on such complicated route? Apparently, open autocracies are hard to maintain over the long haul because they are targets for obvious contempt. A hidden autocracy, camouflaged behind a democracy, is virtually immune to dismantling because you can't take down something that seemingly doesn't exist. Those who detect the truth can be dismissed and branded as conspiracy theorists. Therefore, there's no viable solution to prevent this phenomenon, nor can there be one. Even if genuine democracy emerges somewhere, it will likely morph into a concealed autocracy through described mechanisms. This might even elucidate why public leaders sometimes behave inconsistently or why countries adopt seemingly self-defeating policies. A concealed power with obscure unknown goals may be guiding and manipulating their conduct. In wars, these hidden forces might even back both sides if the continuation of the war serves their purposes. This raises a troubling question: is true democracy and genuine independence for countries an unattainable ideal? As a matter of fact, the above scenario paints a bleak picture where neither democracy nor the independence of countries is ever possible. It portrays a world where shadowy forces will inevitably manipulate the very core of democratic societies, turning them into hidden autocracies. This thought experiment raises profound questions about the nature of power, control, and the delicate balance that must be struck to preserve the integrity and authenticity of democratic governance. The above presents an argument that democracy is not an invention by the people for the people, but rather intentionally designed disguises for shadowy autocracies. That way, any democracy is inherently flawed and susceptible to covert manipulation by powerful entities, effectively rendering it indistinguishable from autocracy, only making it invisible and therefore invincible. While the argument is compelling in its elaboration, there are several counterarguments that can be raised against this perspective. First, it simplifies democracy into something that can be easily controlled by a single or a few entities. In practice, democracies are complex, even chaotical systems with many checks and balances, and therefore uncertainties, even unpredictability. Manipulating all aspects would be an immensely complex task, if not impossible. Second, the premise relies on the existence of a malefactor with virtually unlimited resources and complete impunity. This ignores the potential of oversight bodies, free press, civil society, and international organizations, all of which can act as checks against such hidden corruption. It is deemed that many democracies have robust mechanisms for transparency and accountability, and the assumption that these can be completely co-opted without detection or resistance is quite questionable. The argument also dismisses the power of informed citizenry and grassroots movements. History has shown that public engagement can be a potent force against corruption and autocratic tendencies. In a global context, other nations and international bodies often act to check overt or covert autocratic tendencies, providing another layer of complexity to the scenario presented. While the theoretical scenario is intriguing, there are few, if any, real-world examples that completely fit the model, and the lack of empirical evidence undermines the strength of the argument. We assume that multiple malefactors could easily agree or that one would simply devour the rest. This doesn't take into account the likely differences in goals, strategies, and ideologies among different autocrats. Real-world politics is rarely so straightforward. Democracy is not a monolithic concept, and there are different types of democratic systems. For the sake of simplicity, we generalized all under a single model, which doesn't account for the diversity and adaptability of democratic structures. The argument also presents the scenario as an inevitable outcome without considering that legal, social, and political reforms could mitigate the risks outlined. Finally, the argument somewhat dismisses the role of moral and ethical norms within society, political culture, and individuals, which can be strong drivers for maintaining democratic integrity. In summary, the assumptions and generalizations within the argument leave room for counterarguments based on the complexity of democratic systems, the potential for checks and balances, the diversity of democratic models, and the power of citizen engagement. These counterarguments are not trivial or baseless. They point to the complexities of democratic systems, human behavior, and international relations, all of which might render the scenario outlined in the original text more theoretical than practical. The original argument provides a coherent and internally consistent argument about the vulnerability of democratic systems, but it makes broad assumptions that might not hold up under scrutiny. Democracy, with its checks and balances, transparency, citizen participation, and diversity of forms, is not easily reduced to a simple model. Real-world evidence and the nuanced nature of political systems can indeed provide substantial counterarguments to the idea that any democracy is essentially or inevitably a shadow autocracy. That said, this grim scenario argument does highlight concerns that are part of ongoing debates about democracy, influence, power, and control. These are complex issues that don't lend themselves to simple answers. It might be that the scenario described is less a definitive proof of the impossibility of democracy and more a provocative thought experiment meant to challenge our assumptions and encourage deeper examination of the principles and practices of democratic governance. It's crucial to recognize that the scenario outlined in the original argument is not purely fictional or hypothetical. Attempts to manipulate or subvert democratic processes are real and have been documented in various contexts. Shadowy actors, whether they be powerful individuals, criminal organizations, or even foreign governments, have been known to exert influence over elections, political parties, media, and other democratic institutions. These attempts to tamper with democracy can take many forms, including misinformation campaigns, financial support for specific candidates or parties, hacking and leaking of sensitive information, and more. In some cases, these efforts have been successful in swaying public opinion or even election outcomes. The counterarguments do not dismiss these realities but rather challenge the notion that such attempts are inevitably successful or that they render genuine democracy impossible. The complexity, diversity, resilience, and adaptability of democratic systems, along with the efforts of vigilant citizens, independent media, and international bodies, can act as barriers to these manipulations. The original argument raises vital concerns and serves as a warning about potential vulnerabilities in democratic systems. It's a call to awareness and vigilance, reminding us that democracy requires continuous effort to protect and strengthen. While the argument that genuine democracy is impossible might be contested, the underlying concerns about manipulation and subversion are very much relevant and deserve serious consideration and action. The fundamental principles that differentiate democracy from autocracy revolve around how power is distributed and how governance is conducted. In a democracy, power is distributed among the people, with principles like free and fair elections, citizen participation, accountability, transparency, equality, rule of law, and separation of powers. In contrast, an autocracy centralizes power in the hands of a single leader or a small group, often suppressing dissent and lacking political pluralism. The question of whether it's better to have a good autocrat than evil democratic society raises complex ethical considerations. While a benevolent autocrat might rule with wisdom, the system remains vulnerable to abuse due to a lack of checks and balances. Conversely, a democratic system with malicious actors may lead to harmful policies, but it also has inherent safeguards designed to prevent a concentration of power. Although, democracy has not and never been a panacea for all ills. The most benign scenario where everyone votes for something that nobody actually wants is often referred to as the Abilene paradox. This term was introduced by management expert Jerry B. Harvey in 1974 and is used to describe a situation in which a group of people collectively decide on a course of action that is counter to the preferences of many, or all, of the individuals in the group. The Abilene paradox occurs when members of a group miscommunicate or misunderstand each other's desires, leading them to make collective decisions that no individual member actually supports. It's usually driven by a desire to avoid conflict or a belief that expressing true feelings might create disagreement. In such situations, people might believe that their own preferences are out of step with the group's and, therefore, decide not to voice their objections. They assume that others have different preferences and go along with the decision they think the group wants, even though, in reality, everyone might be thinking the same thing. The Abilene paradox leads to situations where groups make decisions that are in direct contrast with what they actually want, often resulting in dissatisfaction, confusion, and a failure to achieve the group's actual goals or desires. It underlines the importance of clear communication, the willingness to express individual preferences, and the necessity of understanding that disagreement or conflict within a group is not inherently bad and can be vital for arriving at a genuine consensus. The Abilene paradox can be highly relevant to the field of politics, manifesting in situations where political leaders, parties, or even voters collectively support policies, candidates, or decisions that none of them may actually want or agree with. Within a political party, members may feel pressure to conform to the party line even if they disagree with a particular stance. A fear of dissent, desire for unity, or concern about political reprisals might lead individuals within the party to support policies they personally oppose. When everyone acts this way, the party as a whole may move in a direction that no one genuinely supports. In legislative environments, lawmakers may vote for bills or policies that they don't necessarily agree with due to political pressure, loyalty to party leaders, or the desire to maintain a public image. If enough members feel this way but don't voice their true opinions, legislation may pass that is contrary to the actual preferences of the majority. Voters may also fall into the Abilene paradox when they support politicians or policies that they don't actually agree with based on misconceptions about what others in their community believe. For example, they might vote for a candidate they think will win, rather than the one they truly support, assuming that their true preference is out of step with the majority. This could lead to the election of officials or the passage of referendums that don't reflect the genuine will of the people. On an international level, countries might agree to treaties or alliances that none of them truly support, each one believing that the others want the agreement. This can lead to ineffective or even harmful international policies. Sometimes, the media or vocal interest groups can create a perception that a particular policy or candidate has broad support. Politicians, fearing backlash, might go along with this perceived majority opinion even if they don't agree with it personally. If this misperception is widespread, it can lead to political decisions that don't reflect the actual preferences of either the politicians or the populace. The Abilene paradox in politics illustrates the importance of transparent communication, courage to voice dissenting opinions, and awareness of the dynamics that might lead to such paradoxical situations. It underscores the complex interplay of personal beliefs, group dynamics, public perception, and political strategy that can sometimes lead to outcomes that no one truly desires. It's a warning against the dangers of conformity, silence, and the suppression of individual viewpoints in the political arena. Another issue is Dunning-Kruger effect, a cognitive bias where individuals with low ability or knowledge in a given area overestimate their competence and expertise. This effect can certainly apply to political contexts, including among voters. Here's how it might manifest. Voters with limited political knowledge might be more susceptible to overestimating their understanding of complex political issues. This overconfidence can lead them to make voting decisions with a high degree of certainty, even when their understanding of the issues is superficial or incorrect. The Dunning-Kruger effect might also make less politically educated voters more resistant to new information or expert opinions that contradict their beliefs. Since they overestimate their understanding, they may dismiss insights from more knowledgeable sources, thinking they already know better. A lack of political knowledge combined with overconfidence may make these voters more vulnerable to misinformation or propaganda. They might be more likely to accept misleading or false information that aligns with their preconceived notions, as they may not have the tools to critically evaluate these claims. This effect can contribute to polarization and a breakdown in constructive political discourse. If individuals on all sides of a debate are overconfident in their limited understanding, it becomes challenging to have meaningful discussions, find common ground, or reach compromises. In a broader sense, if a significant portion of the electorate is voting based on overconfidence in their limited political understanding, it may lead to election outcomes that don't reflect well-informed choices. This can have long-term impacts on governance and policy direction. Efforts to engage voters and educate them about complex political issues can be hindered by the Dunning-Kruger effect. Those who think they already understand the issues might not seek out additional information, participate in community discussions, or engage with political education efforts. In fact, the Dunning-Kruger effect in the context of voting and political engagement is a complex phenomenon that can have profound impacts on individual voting behavior and the broader political landscape. It underscores the importance of political education, critical thinking, and fostering a culture that values humility and a willingness to engage with diverse viewpoints. Efforts to encourage voters to recognize the limitations of their knowledge and to seek out reliable, diverse sources of information can be vital in mitigating this effect and promoting a more informed and effective democratic process. The Dunning-Kruger effect, where individuals with limited knowledge or competence in a subject overestimate their ability, can also apply to political candidates. Here's how it may manifest and the potential consequences it can have. Some candidates may overestimate their understanding of complex policy issues. This can lead to oversimplified or unrealistic proposals, where the nuances and potential challenges of implementation are overlooked. Their confidence may appeal to voters who are looking for strong leadership, but it can lead to problems down the line if the candidate is elected and struggles to fulfill promises. If a candidate overestimates their competence in a certain area, they may be less likely to seek or heed expert advice. This can lead to misguided decisions, both during the campaign and, if elected, in governance. A refusal to acknowledge gaps in knowledge or seek expert guidance can result in poorly thought out policies. Overconfidence in political acumen can lead to strategic errors in a campaign. Candidates may underestimate opponents, misjudge public sentiment, or make erroneous decisions about where to invest campaign resources. This miscalculation may be the result of overestimating one's own political savvy and understanding of the electoral landscape. Candidates affected by the Dunning-Kruger effect may struggle to communicate effectively with voters. If they believe they understand issues better than they do, they might fail to explain their positions clearly or convincingly, leading to misunderstandings or a lack of trust among the electorate. If elected, a candidate who overestimates their competence might struggle with the realities of governance. The complexity of leading and making informed decisions on a wide range of issues requires humility and a willingness to learn and adapt. An overconfident approach can lead to mistakes, ineffective leadership, and disillusionment among those who supported the candidate. A candidate exhibiting the Dunning-Kruger effect can be a challenge for their political party and supporters. They may make commitments that are difficult to fulfill or take stances that are out of step with expert opinion or broader public sentiment. Aligning with or supporting such a candidate may have consequences for the party's reputation and success. Political opponents may seize on the mistakes or unrealistic promises of a candidate exhibiting the Dunning-Kruger effect, using them to challenge the candidate's competence or credibility. In summary, the Dunning-Kruger effect in political candidates can have significant implications for campaigns and governance. It reflects not just a misunderstanding of specific policy issues but also a broader mindset that may affect decision-making, communication, leadership, and collaboration. Recognizing and mitigating this effect requires self-awareness, humility, and a willingness to engage with complexity and seek guidance from others, all of which are essential qualities for effective political leadership. Another phenomenon rarely taken into account in discussion of democracy is Overton window, named after political analyst Joseph Overton, refers to the range of policies or ideas that are considered acceptable or mainstream within a particular political climate. It's a valuable concept for understanding how political discourse evolves and how certain ideas move from the fringe to the center of political conversation. Here's how the Overton window can play a role in elections. During an election, candidates often position themselves within the Overton window to appeal to the largest segment of voters. By aligning with ideas that are perceived as acceptable or popular, they can increase their electability. Parties and candidates may attempt to shift the Overton window to align more closely with their ideologies. This can be done through consistent messaging, public relations, aligning with influential media or interest groups, and other strategic maneuvers. If successful, these efforts can redefine what's considered reasonable or common sense in the eyes of the electorate, thus benefiting the candidates who hold those positions. As the window of acceptable ideas shifts, it can change how voters perceive candidates and issues. Ideas that were once considered extreme might become more palatable, or mainstream positions might become viewed as outdated or inadequate. This can influence who voters see as viable candidates and what policies they support or oppose. Candidates with ideas outside the current Overton window may struggle to gain traction. While they may attract a passionate base of support, they may also be dismissed as unrealistic or extreme by the broader electorate. However, charismatic outsiders can sometimes shift the window themselves by bringing new ideas into the mainstream. The media plays a substantial role in defining and shifting the Overton window. The ideas that are covered, debated, and legitimized by media outlets can shape public perception of what's acceptable. In turn, this affects both how candidates campaign and how voters respond. If opposing political factions each have a different Overton window, it can lead to increased polarization. Each side may view the other's positions as not just wrong but unacceptable or extreme, hindering compromise and collaboration. The Overton window is not static, it moves in response to changes in culture, society, technology, and other macro-level factors. Elections can be both a cause and a reflection of these shifts, with new ideas being introduced, debated, accepted, or rejected by the populace. The Overton window is a useful lens through which to understand how political ideas gain or lose acceptance. It's a dynamic framework that shapes and is shaped by the strategies of political actors, the behavior of voters, the influence of media, and the broader societal context. In the context of elections, it helps explain why certain policies are embraced or ignored, how candidates position themselves, and how political discourse evolves over time. Understanding the Overton window's role in elections can provide insights into the underlying forces that drive political change. The implementation of democratic principles can vary widely across different cultures and regions, and the process can be manipulated through various means like gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is the practice of manipulating the boundaries of an electoral constituency to favor one party or class. It's typically done by redrawing electoral district boundaries in a way that packs voters of one type into a small number of districts, or spreads them out across many districts, to dilute their voting power. The goal of gerrymandering is often to gain a political advantage for a particular party or group by skewing electoral results. It can lead to electoral maps that look highly irregular and contorted, as the boundaries are drawn in an unnatural way to achieve the desired political result. This practice can undermine the principles of democratic representation, as it might not accurately reflect the will of the people in the electoral outcomes. The term gerrymandering has an interesting origin. It's a portmanteau of gerry and salamander, named after an incident involving Elbridge Gerry, who was the governor of Massachusetts in the early 19th century. In 1812, Gerry's party, the Democratic Republicans, redrew the state's senatorial districts to favor their side. A political cartoonist noted that one of the contorted districts resembled a salamander and created a caricature that combined Gerry's name with salamander, calling it a gerrymander. The redrawing of the district was recognized as a blatant attempt to skew the electoral advantage toward Gerry's party, and the term gerrymandering has since been used to describe similar practices of manipulating electoral district boundaries to gain a political advantage. Another old invention is called voter suppression, which refers to strategies or tactics that are designed to reduce or restrict the ability of eligible voters to cast a ballot. This can take many forms, including requiring specific forms of identification that some voters may not have, limiting the availability of polling places, reducing the hours they are open, or aggressively removing voters from registration lists, sometimes incorrectly. Making the process of registering to vote overly complex or burdensome, spreading false or misleading information about voting procedures, and failing to provide accommodations for individuals with disabilities or non-English speakers can also be methods of suppression. These measures can disproportionately affect minority groups, low-income individuals, the elderly, and other marginalized communities, undermining the principles of democracy by preventing a full and fair representation of the electorate. Efforts to combat voter suppression often focus on expanding voter access, education, and protections to ensure that all eligible citizens have an equal opportunity to participate in the electoral process. Rigged elections occur when the fairness of an election is compromised by manipulation or fraud. This can include tactics such as ballot stuffing, miscounting votes, voter suppression, manipulation of voter registration, and other fraudulent practices that alter the legitimate outcome of an election. If the integrity of an election is compromised in this way, it can have serious consequences for the democratic process. Trust in the system can be eroded, leading to skepticism about the legitimacy of the government and potentially causing social unrest, but worse, when it goes unnoticed. The influence of money in politics is a pervasive and complex issue that affects many democratic systems around the world. It has become a critical aspect of political campaigns, often determining who can run for office, how campaigns are conducted, and, to some extent, the decisions made by elected officials once they are in office. In modern political campaigns, the need for money is undeniable. Funds are necessary for advertisements, rallies, outreach, and all the other means by which candidates make their cases to the voters. Without sufficient funds, a campaign can struggle to gain traction and communicate its message. This need for money can sometimes tilt the playing field in favor of wealthier candidates or those with access to substantial financial resources from donors and political action committees. The influence of money is also seen in lobbying, where interest groups use funds to gain access to politicians and influence legislation. This can create a situation where politicians are more attentive to the needs and interests of the wealthy or powerful groups that fund them, rather than the broader public. The worry here is that the voice of the average citizen may be drowned out by those who can afford to spend more to advocate for their interests. Furthermore, money in politics may lead to a perception, if not the reality, of corruption. Large donations might be seen as attempts to buy influence, leading to distrust and cynicism among the electorate. This erodes the trust that is vital for a functioning democracy, and citizens may begin to feel that their votes and voices don't matter. Attempts have been made to regulate the flow of money in politics through campaign finance laws. These laws often set limits on contributions and require transparency in reporting where campaign funds come from. But these regulations have their challenges, too. Loopholes in the advent of dark money, or funds that aren't fully traceable to their sources, can sometimes make these regulations less effective. There's also an argument that money is a form of speech and that limiting it infringes on the freedom of expression. Some believe that spending money to support a candidate or cause is a way of expressing one's views, and thus should be protected. The influence of money in politics is multifaceted, affecting who can run for office, how campaigns are conducted, the decisions made by those in power, and even how citizens perceive their democracy. The challenge is finding a balance that ensures fair representation and access for all citizens while minimizing the potentially corrupting influence of money. Striking this balance requires ongoing vigilance, public debate, and careful crafting of laws and regulations to ensure that the role of money in politics supports rather than undermines the democratic process. All these unhealthy ways to win the elections can sometimes lead to a governance system that does not fully reflect the will of the people, even though nobody can assert that this will is good, just or moral. Furthermore, democracy does not automatically resolve issues related to economic inequality, racial or gender disparities, environmental challenges, or other complex social problems. Addressing these issues often requires targeted policies and concerted efforts beyond simply holding elections. A purely majoritarian democracy may sometimes overlook or trample on the rights and interests of minorities, so balancing the will of the majority with the protection of minority rights is a complex task that may not always be perfectly achieved in democratic systems. Also, democracy functions best when supported by strong institutions, an educated populace, and a robust civil society. In regions where these factors are lacking, implementing a democratic system may not be sufficient to address deep-seated problems. It's worth noting that democracy is not a monolithic concept but rather exists in various forms, such as direct democracy, representative democracy, and hybrid systems. The effectiveness of these systems can vary depending on the context. While democracy may not be a panacea, it is often argued that it is preferable to many alternative forms of governance. Research suggests that democracies tend to perform better on measures like human rights protections and overall life satisfaction. However, this is a subject of ongoing debate, and different cultures may have unique preferences and needs regarding governance. Indeed, democracy is better than other forms of governance, because it better assists the shadowy autocracy to run its hidden agendas behind democratic facade. In fact, while democracy offers many advantages, it is not a one-size-fits-all solution for every societal problem. Engaging with the complex challenges and nuances of democratic governance requires a thoughtful and multifaceted approach. The goal is often to adapt democratic principles to the unique circumstances of a given society, working towards a more just, inclusive, and effective system of governance. Historical examples like Adolf Hitler's rise to power further illustrate these complexities. Although initially coming to power through legal means within a democratic system, Hitler's regime quickly dismantled democratic institutions and established a totalitarian state. This shows how democratic processes can be manipulated, emphasizing the importance of robust safeguards, education, and civic engagement to protect democratic values. In 2006, Hamas, an organization considered by many international entities as a terrorist group, won a majority in the Palestinian Legislative Council. This victory was seen by many as a legitimate expression of the will of the people, as the elections were deemed generally free and fair by international observers. However, the outcome led to internal and international tensions, sanctions, and a complex political situation that contributed to a serious jeopardy for the security of Israel, and further divide between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank run by different terrorist organizations hostile to each other. This example emphasizes that democratic processes do not always lead to outcomes that align with international norms or expectations. It also illustrates how democracy is not merely a mechanical process of voting but is deeply interconnected with societal context, political culture, economic conditions, and international relations. The Hamas example underscores the importance of considering not just the mechanisms of democratic elections but also the broader political environment, the maturity of political institutions, the rule of law, and the protection of minority rights. It's a reminder that democracy is a multifaceted system that requires a delicate balance of various factors, and it cannot be reduced to mere electoral outcomes. It raises profound questions about how democracy can be nurtured and sustained, and how it interacts with complex political realities on both a local and global scale. Even more complex are scenarios that challenge the universality of democratic principles, such as the hypothetical situation of running a vote in a cannibal tribe. In such hypothetical scenario involving a vote on the question of the legitimacy of anthropophagy, the practice of eating human flesh, the outcome would likely be highly dependent on the cultural, moral, and practical considerations unique to that community. Assuming the tribe has had a long-standing tradition of cannibalism, it may be deeply ingrained in their customs and beliefs. If this practice is tied to religious or cultural rituals, social status, or even survival, the community may have developed strong justifications for it over generations. In a vote on this matter, those who are deeply entrenched in the tradition may argue for its continuation, emphasizing its significance in maintaining the tribe's identity and cohesion. They may view anthropophagy as a sacred practice that connects them to their ancestors or serves other vital cultural functions. However, there could be members within the tribe who question this practice. These individuals may argue that the practice is inhumane or unnecessary and that the tribe should move away from it, but they will most probably be eaten after casting the vote by the winning majority. This raises questions about cultural relativism and the universality of principles like human rights and dignity. Democracy is not merely about majority rule but includes essential principles like the protection of individual rights and minority interests. If a society's cultural norms conflict with these principles, implementing a democratic system might lead to outcomes considered unethical from an external perspective. Democracy and autocracy are differentiated by how power is wielded and the underlying values and norms that guide governance. The examples and scenarios discussed underscore the multifaceted nature of these systems, as well as the importance of understanding the interplay between political structures, human behavior, cultural context, and ethical considerations. Whether in historical examples or theoretical scenarios, the principles that govern democratic societies continue to be subjects of profound examination and debate, reflecting the ongoing challenges of governance in our interconnected world. Democratic systems can be manipulated by external actors in various ways, leading to significant challenges in maintaining the integrity of democratic processes. Throughout history, we have seen different methods being employed to influence the outcomes of democratic elections and governance. One common tactic is information warfare, where external actors can influence public opinion through disinformation campaigns. They might use social media platforms to spread false information, amplify divisive issues, or propagate propaganda. Financial influence is another method, where foreign powers might fund political parties, politicians, or political campaigns to exert influence. Cyberattacks on election infrastructure, hacking political organizations, or leaking sensitive information can disrupt the democratic process. Additionally, engaging in espionage or other covert activities can be used to manipulate political outcomes. Despite these vulnerabilities, democratic societies have developed checks and balances to prevent manipulation by powerful entities. Election security measures, including robust cybersecurity protocols, protect election infrastructure and political organizations. By educating the public about disinformation and fostering critical thinking, the impact of information warfare can be reduced. Transparency in political funding, through strict regulations regarding political contributions and disclosure requirements, can limit undue financial influence. International cooperation, including collaboration with allies and international organizations to monitor elections, share intelligence, and coordinate responses to foreign interference, further strengthens democratic resilience. Legal and regulatory frameworks that implement laws penalizing foreign interference and holding accountable those who collude with foreign entities are essential as well. While democratic systems are not immune to manipulation by external actors, a combination of technological safeguards, public awareness, transparent political financing, international cooperation, and robust legal frameworks can provide a strong defense against such interference. These measures are crucial in preserving the integrity of democratic processes and maintaining public trust in the system. They reflect the multifaceted nature of democracy and underscore the need for continuous vigilance and adaptation to emerging threats and challenges. The complexity and diversity of democratic systems play a dual role in shaping both their resilience and vulnerability. On the resilient side, the adaptability that comes with complexity and diversity allows democratic systems to change with evolving conditions. Diverse democratic structures allow for innovation and flexibility in governance, helping the system to grow and adapt to new challenges. This very complexity often includes various checks and balances that prevent any single entity from gaining unchecked power, thereby maintaining stability. Furthermore, the diversity within a democratic system can reflect a pluralistic society, allowing for different viewpoints to be heard and acknowledged. This pluralism can foster dialogue and compromise, leading to more inclusive solutions that reflect a wider range of interests. However, this complexity and diversity are not without their drawbacks, and they can contribute to vulnerabilities as well. For instance, a complex system might be difficult for citizens to understand or navigate, leading to confusion and possibly even a lack of trust or participation. Diversity of interests might also lead to fragmentation and gridlock, particularly if the mechanisms for compromise are weak or if the system is exploited by special interests for their own gain. In some cases, different branches or levels of government might act inconsistently, undermining the effectiveness of governance. Or, the perceived distance and complexity might fuel a populist backlash, as citizens feel the system is unresponsive or out of touch. So, while complexity and diversity in democratic systems can provide strength and adaptability, these same features can also create potential weaknesses. The overall resilience or vulnerability of a particular democratic system is likely to depend on how well these aspects are managed, with effective leadership, strong institutions, and active citizen participation playing crucial roles in balancing these dual characteristics. Autocratic regimes can present themselves as democracies, often employing a variety of strategies to maintain a facade of democratic governance. This deceptive appearance can make it challenging to identify the true nature of the regime, but there are ways to detect these inconsistencies. Autocratic leaders might conduct elections but manipulate the process to ensure that they or their chosen candidates win. These elections might look democratic on the surface but are often characterized by voter suppression, intimidation, or outright fraud. An unusually high victory margin or a consistent pattern of winning across multiple elections can be telltale signs. They might also maintain democratic institutions such as parliaments, courts, or media, but these are often controlled or heavily influenced by the ruling power. A lack of checks and balances, suppression of opposition, or the absence of a free and independent media can reveal the autocratic nature of the regime. In some instances, autocratic regimes pay lip service to human rights and freedoms but crack down on dissent, protest, or any form of opposition. The presence of laws that restrict freedom of speech, assembly, or press, along with aggressive enforcement of those laws, can be indicative of an autocratic regime posing as a democracy. International organizations and human rights groups often monitor and report on these signs. Detailed analysis and comparison with established democratic standards, observations by independent election monitors, and evaluations by global indices that measure democracy and human rights can provide valuable insights into whether a regime is truly democratic or merely posing as one. Furthermore, the real-life experiences of citizens, activists, journalists, and others within the country often paint a vivid picture of the true nature of the government. Consistent reports of oppression, lack of political plurality, suppression of dissent, or controlled media can uncover the autocratic nature hidden behind a democratic facade. So, while autocratic regimes can and do present themselves as democracies, careful examination of their practices, institutions, laws, and the experiences of those living under the regime can unmask their true character. Moral and ethical norms play a critical role in maintaining the integrity of democratic systems. In democracies, these norms often underpin the rule of law, individual rights, and the balance of power among different branches of government. Moral principles guide citizens, leaders, and institutions in making decisions that respect the rights and dignity of individuals, ensuring that the democratic processes remain fair, transparent, and just. Ethical behavior supports trust in the system, as public officials are expected to act in the best interests of the people, rather than for personal gain. Without these moral and ethical foundations, democratic systems could become vulnerable to corruption, misuse of power, and erosion of citizens' rights. The lack of integrity might lead to a loss of trust in the system and could diminish the people's willingness to participate in democratic processes. However, the challenge in relying on moral and ethical norms is the relativity of morals and ethics. Different cultures, religions, and individuals might have varying interpretations of what is right or wrong, fair or unjust. These differences can lead to conflicts and difficulties in finding common ground within a diverse society. Overcoming this relativity requires a focus on shared values and principles that transcend individual and cultural differences. In democratic societies, this often involves building consensus around fundamental human rights, freedoms, and the rule of law. This common understanding can create a framework within which diverse moral and ethical viewpoints can coexist and contribute to the democratic process. Education, dialogue, and engagement can also play vital roles in bridging moral and ethical divides. Encouraging open discussion about moral and ethical principles, and why they are essential for democracy, can foster understanding and tolerance of different viewpoints. Institutions that uphold and enforce ethical standards, such as independent judiciary bodies, watchdog organizations, and transparent governance processes, provide a safeguard against the relativity of morals and ethics. By clearly defining and enforcing ethical conduct, these institutions reinforce the values that support democratic integrity. International bodies and foreign governments can exert significant influence over both democratic and autocratic nations through various means, impacting the political landscape and governance structures. In democratic countries, international bodies often engage through diplomatic channels, trade agreements, and alliances. They may promote shared values like human rights, economic cooperation, and environmental standards. Foreign governments may also influence democracies through soft power, such as cultural exchanges, educational programs, and the fostering of strategic partnerships. In autocratic nations, the interaction can be more complex. International organizations might exert pressure to promote human rights or to challenge practices considered oppressive. They may employ sanctions, diplomatic isolation, or even threats of military intervention. Foreign governments may also engage with autocratic regimes through trade, strategic alliances, or by supporting opposition movements. The forceful introduction of democracy, as seen in cases like Serbia, Iraq, and Libya, has been a subject of significant controversy and debate. While the intention may be to replace an oppressive regime with a democratic system, the implementation often leads to complex and unintended consequences. Firstly, the forceful imposition of democracy often lacks local context and understanding. It can ignore historical, cultural, and social dynamics that shape a nation's political landscape, leading to resistance and instability. Secondly, the immediate aftermath of such interventions can create power vacuums, leading to internal conflicts, rise of extremist groups, and humanitarian crises. Rebuilding governance structures, legal systems, and societal norms takes time, and the process might be fraught with challenges and setbacks. Finally, the perception of foreign interference in domestic affairs can create long-lasting mistrust and animosity. It might be viewed as an imperialistic endeavor rather than a genuine effort to promote democratic governance. The disastrous consequences witnessed in some instances highlight the complex nature of forcefully introducing democracy. While the goal of promoting democratic values is often lauded, the methods and execution require careful consideration, planning, and understanding of the local context. The lessons learned from these interventions underscore the importance of collaboration with local communities, building trust, understanding cultural nuances, and a commitment to long-term support and engagement. Forceful imposition without these considerations may lead to failure and significant suffering, rather than the intended democratization and liberation. There are different types or models of democracy, and they each have their own unique strengths and weaknesses. Understanding these variations can help us appreciate how grassroots movements and citizen activism can play a role in strengthening democratic governance. Direct democracy allows citizens to make decisions directly, giving them true empowerment and engagement. This model's strength is its potential for authentic citizen involvement, but it can become impractical in large and complex societies where direct involvement in every decision may lead to inefficiency. Representative democracy, where citizens elect representatives to make decisions on their behalf, allows for efficient decision-making and accommodates the complexity of modern societies. However, this can sometimes lead to a disconnect between the people and their representatives, causing a perceived lack of influence over decisions. Constitutional democracy provides a stable legal framework that limits government powers and protects minority rights, guarding against arbitrary rule. Its weakness might be the rigidity of the Constitution, which can hinder adaptability to changing societal needs. Participatory democracy emphasizes broad citizen participation in decision-making, fostering a sense of ownership. While this inclusivity is a strength, the downside might be that increased participation requires more time and resources, potentially slowing down decision-making. Many democracies combine elements of these types, creating a balance between citizen participation, representative governance, and constitutional safeguards. Grassroots movements and citizen activism can play an essential role in strengthening democratic governance across these various models. By encouraging ordinary citizens to get involved, grassroots movements can bridge the gap between government and people, especially in systems where a disconnect might exist. They enhance participation, allowing democracy to be more reflective and responsive. These movements can also hold elected officials accountable by drawing attention to issues and demanding action or change. This reinforces democratic principles like transparency and accountability, ensuring that the government is responsible to the people. Furthermore, grassroots efforts often bring marginalized or minority voices to the forefront, contributing to a more inclusive democracy. They make sure that the voices of all citizens, not just the majority or those in power, are heard and considered. Activism additionally educates and empowers citizens. People learn about their rights, the functioning of their government, and how they can influence it. This understanding allows them to engage in democratic processes with purpose, fostering a sense of empowerment and ownership over their political system. The various models of democracy offer different opportunities and face unique challenges. Grassroots movements and citizen activism serve as vital tools, infusing democratic systems with energy and responsiveness. As a matter of fact, since the dawn of the information technology era comes a compelling idea of a direct democracy model without traditional legislative bodies, where all laws are voted on directly by the populace. Imagine a society where every registered voter has the power to propose and vote on laws directly. In this vision of direct democracy, a digital voting portal is created. This secure and transparent online platform is accessible to all voters, allowing them to propose, review, and vote on legislation. To propose a new law, any registered voter can submit their idea. If it garners enough support from fellow citizens, the proposal moves to an independent body of subject matter experts. They review the legislation for feasibility, ethics, and alignment with national interests and provide a public report. Following this expert review, the public has the opportunity to read the proposal and the experts' insights. They can suggest amendments, engage in debates, and share opinions. After a designated review period, the legislation is put to a final vote. But this isn't just a matter of clicking a button. Before casting their vote, citizens must take a simple quiz to demonstrate their understanding of the legislation. This requirement ensures that voters are making informed decisions. The entire process would be transparent and secure. Utilizing blockchain technology ensures that votes are recorded accurately, and regular audits by independent bodies add an extra layer of integrity. To make this system practical and inclusive, information database and voter education and training centers would be set up. An information database provides relevant statistics, studies, and data to voters, while education centers would offer online training for citizens in understanding legislation and using the online portal. What about the time and effort citizens invest in this process? Voters are compensated for the time spent reviewing and voting on legislation, with special recognition or additional civic rewards for active participation. Administratively, a governmental body would be responsible for enacting the laws, and a robust judiciary would oversee their fair application. Special emergency powers would be available to address immediate threats requiring a rapid response. Of course, this model isn't without challenges. Voter fatigue could become a problem if the populace is overwhelmed with too many proposals. Ensuring accessibility for all citizens, combating misinformation, and maintaining robust fact-checking would all require careful attention. This model of direct democracy represents a radical shift from current governmental structures, emphasizing transparency, education, and the engagement of the entire voting population. Its implementation would certainly be complex, requiring technological innovation, strong political will, and continuous refinement. But the result could be a more participatory and responsive government, directly shaped by the people it serves. In a society where direct democracy replaces a traditional parliamentary system, a new vision for governance emerges. Every citizen has the right to propose and vote on legislation, fostering a greater sense of ownership and engagement in the political process. This direct involvement allows more voices to be heard, which can lead to a more nuanced understanding of the issues at hand. By bypassing political parties and representatives, the focus shifts to the issues themselves rather than party lines. This might lead to collaborative decision-making and a potential reduction in political polarization. The process could become more transparent, as well, as every citizen would have direct insight into how and why decisions are made. The responsiveness to public needs might also be enhanced. Traditional parliamentary processes can sometimes slow the passage of laws, as they must go through various committees and stages. In a direct democracy, laws might be passed or amended more quickly, allowing for a more adaptive and immediate response to societal needs. Cost-effectiveness is another possible advantage. Without the need for a parliamentary body, there may be a reduction in administrative costs related to maintaining such an institution. These saved resources could be redirected to other societal needs. Perhaps one of the most intriguing aspects of this model is the potential reduction in corruption and lobbying. Elected representatives, susceptible to outside influences, are replaced by the citizens themselves, who become the decision makers. This might lessen the impact of special interests, making the process more aligned with the public's will. However, the transition from a parliamentary system to direct democracy is not without its complexities. Ensuring that all citizens are informed and able to make complex decisions would require significant effort. There would also be the challenge of voter fatigue and the risk of decision-making becoming overly simplistic or populist. Furthermore, the lack of representative bodies could make it harder to negotiate and find compromises on contentious issues. In conclusion, while the idea of eliminating a parliament in favor of direct citizen participation offers intriguing benefits, such as increased public engagement, transparency, and potentially more responsive governance, it also presents significant challenges. Implementing such a system would require careful planning, robust safeguards, and possibly even a cultural shift in how politics is approached. Although, shadow forces will never allow such transformation. They do not need to hear the people's voice. Being forced to switch to such system, they will do everything in their power to make it inefficient or easily manipulated. Protecting democracy from shadowy manipulation is a complex task that requires a multifaceted approach. It involves legal, social, and political reforms, each targeting different aspects of manipulation and influence within the democratic system. The case of Iceland's attempt to draft a new constitution through a participatory process is an interesting example of direct democratic engagement meeting challenges within a traditional parliamentary system. After the financial crisis in 2008, which led to significant public dissatisfaction and protests, the government of Iceland decided to embark on an ambitious constitutional reform process. The aim was to make the constitution more inclusive and reflective of the will of the people. In 2010, a national forum consisting of 950 randomly selected citizens met to discuss the values that should underpin the new constitution. Following this, a constitutional council, made up of 25 citizens who were not politicians, was elected to draft the new document. They used social media to solicit input from the public and held open meetings to foster transparency and citizen engagement. The resulting draft constitution included provisions for greater transparency in government, natural resource ownership, and direct democratic measures like citizen-initiated referendums. In 2012, a national referendum was held, where about two-thirds of the voters supported the draft constitution. However, the process faced significant challenges within the traditional parliamentary system. The existing parliament, the Althing, was responsible for ratifying the new constitution. Despite the public support, political opposition and procedural obstacles hindered the process. Various interests within the parliament were not aligned with the proposed changes, and concerns were raised over legal aspects of the process. In the end, the parliament failed to adopt the new constitution, and the process stalled. The draft was never ratified, leading to disappointment among many Icelanders who had actively participated in the process. The Icelandic case serves as an illustrative example of the complexities of blending direct democratic engagement with traditional representative systems. While the process was hailed as innovative and inclusive, translating the popular will into actual constitutional change proved to be much more challenging. It highlights the potential disconnect that can exist between participatory democratic initiatives and established political institutions, and how difficult it can be to reconcile the two in the pursuit of fundamental systemic change. Legally, a strong framework of laws and regulations is needed to address election interference, disinformation campaigns, and corruption. This includes stringent regulation of political advertising, especially online, where much of the shadowy manipulation takes place. Transparency in campaign financing is essential, requiring disclosure of donors and the implementation of strict limits on contributions. Laws governing cybersecurity must be robust to protect against hacking and other forms of electronic interference. Penalties for engaging in corrupt practices must be severe enough to serve as a real deterrent. However, relying solely on punishment is not enough. Prevention is equally, if not more, vital. Systems should be designed in such a way that they minimize opportunities for corrupt behavior in the first place. This can be done through transparency, accountability, and strong institutional checks and balances. Transparency ensures that the public can see how decisions are made and how resources are allocated, making it more difficult for corruption to go unnoticed. This often involves open access to information, transparent bidding processes, clear rules and regulations, and robust media oversight. Accountability ensures that those in power are answerable for their actions. Effective oversight bodies, independent judiciary systems, and robust law enforcement can hold individuals accountable for corrupt behavior. Checks and balances within the system, including the separation of powers, can prevent any one individual or group from having unchecked control, thus reducing opportunities for corruption. Incorporating technology can also play a crucial role in making corruption more difficult. Digital systems for government services can reduce human discretion, and thus opportunities for bribery, enhance efficiency, and provide an audit trail. Education and a cultural shift towards integrity and ethical behavior are also essential components. This involves not only legal and institutional reform but also fostering a society where corruption is viewed as unacceptable. The fight against corruption requires both a strong legal framework with strict penalties and a systemic approach that focuses on prevention. By creating a system where corruption is not only punished but also made extremely difficult to carry out, a more fair, just, and efficient society can be built. It's a complex task, but one that is essential for the health and success of any democratic society. Social reforms would play a critical role in promoting awareness and education among citizens. A well-informed electorate is essential to a functioning democracy. This includes education on media literacy and critical thinking, empowering citizens to recognize and evaluate disinformation and propaganda. Encouraging open dialogue and fostering a culture of skepticism and inquiry can also help create a more resilient democratic society. Technology companies, particularly social media platforms, must also take responsibility for identifying and combating fake news and disinformation on their platforms. Politically, there must be a renewed emphasis on the values of transparency, accountability, and inclusion. This includes the creation of independent oversight bodies, like electoral commissions, that are well-resourced and empowered to act impartially. It means working to eliminate gerrymandering and implementing more proportional representation systems to ensure that elections are fair and representative. Encouraging greater diversity and political participation can also be a powerful tool against manipulation, as it may make it harder for any single interest group to exert undue influence. International collaboration is another crucial element. Democratic nations should work together to share information, strategies, and best practices for combating shadowy manipulation. They should also agree on common regulations for international campaign financing, cybersecurity, and information warfare. This international solidarity can provide a strong bulwark against those who would seek to undermine democratic processes. Misinformation is a powerful tool that can have profound effects on both democratic and autocratic regimes, serving to either undermine or support them depending on its use and intent. In democratic systems, misinformation can significantly undermine the essential principles of informed citizen participation and trust in institutions. Democracy relies on the ability of the citizenry to make informed decisions based on accurate information. When misinformation is spread, whether intentionally or inadvertently, it can create confusion, sow distrust, and polarize the populace. This erosion of trust in information sources can lead to apathy and disengagement from the political process, weakening the very foundation of democratic governance. Misinformation can also be weaponized by political actors to manipulate public opinion, targeting specific groups or issues to create division and strife. On the other hand, misinformation can sometimes be used to support democratic ideals, though this is less common and often unintentional. For example, the exposure of misinformation campaigns can lead to increased public awareness of the importance of media literacy and critical thinking, fostering a more discerning and engaged electorate. Furthermore, a free and independent press that actively debunks misinformation can strengthen democratic principles by reinforcing trust in legitimate information sources. In autocratic regimes, misinformation often plays a more deliberate and state-sanctioned role in maintaining control and suppressing dissent. By controlling information flow and propagating misinformation, autocratic governments can create a narrative that supports their rule, undermines opposition, and suppresses dissenting voices. Misinformation in these systems may be used to demonize opponents, glorify the regime, or distract from domestic problems. The lack of independent media and freedom of expression in autocratic regimes often makes it easier for governments to use misinformation as a tool for manipulation and control. However, misinformation can also undermine autocratic regimes. The spread of false information, particularly if it becomes widespread and believed, can lead to unrest, dissatisfaction, and even rebellion if it exposes cracks in the regime's facade or highlights grievances that resonate with the population. Moreover, with the advent of the internet and social media, controlling information has become more challenging even for autocratic regimes. Citizens with access to alternative information sources can sometimes pierce through state-controlled narratives, potentially undermining the regime's grip on power. Misinformation is a double-edged sword with the potential to both support and undermine political systems, whether democratic or autocratic. Its role is complex and multifaceted, affecting trust, participation, control, and stability across different types of governance. Combating misinformation, therefore, becomes an essential task for preserving the integrity of political systems and the well-being of societies. The free press is often described as the fourth estate in democratic societies, acting as a vital safeguard and an essential component of a thriving democracy. Its role is multifaceted and profoundly interconnected with the principles of transparency, accountability, and informed citizenry. In a functioning democracy, the free press serves as a watchdog, monitoring and scrutinizing government actions and policies. By investigating and reporting on corruption, inefficiencies, and injustices, the press helps hold officials accountable to the public. This relentless pursuit of truth helps to keep the government's power in check and ensures that citizens are informed about the actions taken on their behalf. The free press also plays a crucial role in fostering an informed electorate by providing diverse viewpoints and comprehensive analysis of complex issues. In doing so, it facilitates open debate and dialogue, contributing to the formation of public opinion and enabling citizens to make informed decisions, especially during elections. A free and independent press promotes transparency by ensuring that information is accessible to all. It helps bridge the gap between government and citizens, providing insight into the inner workings of governance and giving voice to those who might otherwise be unheard. When the free press is compromised, the consequences can be severe, and the very essence of democracy is threatened. A compromised press can occur through government censorship, intimidation of journalists, corporate control, or the suppression of dissenting voices. The erosion of press freedom leads to a lack of transparency and accountability, allowing corruption and abuse of power to go unchecked. Without a robust and independent press, citizens may be left with a narrow and distorted view of their society and government, leading to misinformation and a lack of critical understanding. This compromised information environment stifles debate and silences opposition, leading to an increasingly polarized and fragmented society. Furthermore, a compromised press can lead to a decline in trust in media institutions. If the public perceives the press as biased or beholden to particular interests, confidence in journalism as a whole may wane. This decline in trust can further exacerbate political divisions and undermine the collective ability of citizens to engage in meaningful democratic participation. In the worst-case scenario, the loss of a free press can pave the way for authoritarian tendencies, where the government or other powerful entities exert undue control over information. The resulting lack of oversight and critical inquiry can allow for a gradual erosion of democratic principles and the rule of law. Technology's relationship with democratic processes is a complex and paradoxical one. On one hand, it offers unprecedented opportunities for enhancing democracy, but on the other, it poses significant challenges and risks that could threaten the integrity of democratic governance. The rise of information technology has paved the way for more direct forms of democracy, such as online voting and real-time citizen engagement with government. Technology has the potential to make the democratic process more accessible, transparent, and efficient. It can facilitate greater participation, enabling citizens to have a more immediate and direct voice in decision-making. Social media platforms and online forums can foster debate, collaboration, and community building, bridging gaps and connecting diverse groups of people. However, the same technology that enables these benefits also opens up new vulnerabilities. The risk of manipulations and interference is more pronounced in the digital age. Cybersecurity breaches, hacking, and online disinformation campaigns can undermine the integrity of elections and other democratic processes. Algorithms and targeted advertising can be used to manipulate public opinion, while the anonymity of online interactions can foster a breeding ground for trolls and malicious actors. The spread of fake news and misinformation through social media is a particularly pressing concern. It can distort public perception, fuel polarization, and erode trust in institutions. The lack of regulation and oversight in the digital realm means that shadowy forces can operate with relative impunity, turning the very tools designed to enhance democracy into weapons against it. This dichotomy raises a profound question: what is the point of developing an excellent direct democracy if it can be so easily subverted? The potential for technology to turn democratic innovations into a joke is a real and pressing concern. The answer lies in recognizing that technology is not inherently good or bad, it's a tool that can be used for either purpose. The challenge is in finding ways to harness technology's potential to strengthen democracy while guarding against its risks. This requires a multifaceted approach, including robust legal frameworks, ethical guidelines, and technological safeguards. Ensuring transparency in political advertising, investing in cybersecurity, promoting digital literacy, and fostering a culture of responsibility among technology companies are all essential measures. Collaboration between governments, civil society, tech companies, and citizens is crucial in developing strategies to leverage technology for democratic ends while mitigating its threats. Regulations must be adaptive and forward-thinking, and ethical considerations must be at the forefront of technological innovation. In fact, while technology offers incredible potential for enhancing direct democracy, it also poses significant challenges that can undermine its integrity. Recognizing this dual nature and taking proactive, collaborative steps to address the risks without stifling innovation is key to ensuring that technology serves as a force for democratic strengthening rather than a tool for its subversion. The pursuit of direct democracy in the digital age is not a futile endeavor, but it requires a vigilant and thoughtful approach to prevent it from becoming a tragic irony. The psychological factors that drive support for democratic or autocratic leadership are complex and multifaceted, shaped by individual characteristics, cultural context, historical experiences, and socioeconomic conditions. In times of crisis or perceived threat, individuals may gravitate towards autocratic leadership due to a desire for stability, order, and strong control. Autocratic leaders often promise decisive action and clear direction, appealing to those who feel overwhelmed by uncertainty or chaos. Conversely, democratic leadership, with its emphasis on dialogue, consensus building, and pluralism, may appeal to those who value diversity of thought and are comfortable with ambiguity. Trust in governmental institutions plays a critical role in determining support for different leadership styles. A lack of trust may foster cynicism and apathy, driving individuals towards autocratic figures who promise to shake things up or take decisive action outside traditional channels. In contrast, trust in democratic institutions often correlates with support for democratic leadership, as people believe in the system's ability to represent their interests and uphold the rule of law. Personal values such as openness to experience, empathy, and respect for diversity tend to align with support for democratic leadership. Individuals who value individual rights, freedom of expression, and equality are more likely to advocate for a leadership style that promotes these principles. Conversely, values that emphasize obedience, hierarchy, and nationalism may be more aligned with autocratic leadership. People's social identities and affiliations can profoundly influence their support for different types of leadership. Loyalty to a particular group or ideology may lead to support for a leader who represents those interests, regardless of whether they are democratic or autocratic. Tribalism and in-group favoritism can further polarize opinions and drive support towards one style of leadership over the other. Economic discontent and inequality can create a breeding ground for support for autocratic leadership, especially if democratic institutions are perceived as failing to address these issues. Autocratic leaders may appeal to those who feel left behind or marginalized by promising quick fixes and strong action. On the other hand, a stable and prosperous economic environment may foster support for democratic leadership by reinforcing faith in democratic processes and institutions. Education and access to diverse information sources tend to foster critical thinking, tolerance, and a broader understanding of democratic principles. Conversely, limited access to education or exposure to biased or manipulated information can shape perceptions and attitudes in favor of autocratic leadership. Certain personality traits, such as high levels of authoritarianism or need for closure, may predispose individuals to favor autocratic leadership. These traits often correlate with a preference for clear, definitive answers and a reluctance to engage with complexity or ambiguity. On the other hand, traits such as openness and agreeableness might incline individuals towards democratic values and leadership. In fact, the psychological factors that drive support for democratic or autocratic leadership are deeply interconnected and influenced by a complex web of individual and societal factors. Understanding these dynamics requires a nuanced and multidisciplinary approach, considering not only individual psychology but also the broader social, cultural, and economic context in which these preferences are formed. The concept of national sovereignty, which refers to the full right and power of a governing body to govern itself without interference from outside sources or bodies, plays a significant role in the dynamics between democracy and autocracy. This relationship manifests in various ways, reflecting the nuances of governance, international relations, and the values underpinning different political systems. In democratic societies, national sovereignty is often closely tied to the principles of self-determination, individual rights, and collective decision-making. The idea that a nation's people have the ultimate authority over their government is foundational to democratic governance. Democratic leaders are typically seen as stewards of the national will, and their legitimacy is often derived from their adherence to the rule of law, transparent processes, and responsiveness to the electorate. Autocratic regimes, on the other hand, often invoke national sovereignty to assert control and justify centralized power. In this context, sovereignty may be wielded as a shield against external criticism or intervention, emphasizing the primacy of the state and often the leader's personal authority over all internal matters. The concept of national sovereignty in autocratic systems might be used to suppress dissent, limit freedoms, and reject international norms or agreements that could challenge the regime's control. The dynamics between democracy and autocracy, as influenced by national sovereignty, also play out on the international stage. Sovereign nations must navigate their relationships with one another, balancing respect for each other's autonomy with the pursuit of shared interests, values, and commitments to international law. Democratic nations, for example, often promote values such as human rights and good governance in their foreign policy. However, these efforts can come into tension with respect for other nations' sovereignty, especially when addressing issues like human rights abuses in autocratic states. The line between legitimate advocacy for democratic values and perceived interference in another nation's internal affairs can be fine and highly contentious. Similarly, autocratic regimes might view international criticism or efforts to promote democratic values as an infringement on their sovereignty. This perspective can fuel tensions between autocratic and democratic states, leading to diplomatic conflicts, economic sanctions, or even isolation from the international community. National sovereignty also influences the ways in which international organizations and alliances function. Balancing respect for individual nations' autonomy with the pursuit of collective goals is a persistent challenge in global governance. Democratic nations may push for international norms and agreements that reflect their values, while autocratic states may resist these efforts, citing sovereignty concerns. Actually, the concept of national sovereignty is intricately woven into the dynamics between democracy and autocracy, both within nations and in their interactions with one another. It can be a source of tension or cooperation, reflecting deeper values and political philosophies. Understanding how sovereignty plays into these dynamics requires a nuanced appreciation of the contexts in which it is invoked and the interests and values it is used to defend or promote. Whether as a tool for asserting control, a principle for guiding governance, or a point of contention in international relations, national sovereignty remains a central factor in the complex interplay between democratic and autocratic systems. A shadow autocracy governing behind the facade of a democracy, although an alarming idea, is not entirely outside the realm of possibility. This phenomenon could be described as a situation where democratic institutions and processes exist in form but not in substance, with real power being concentrated in the hands of a hidden or unaccountable elite. The signs of such governance can be subtle but might manifest in several interrelated ways. One clear sign would be a gradual erosion of democratic norms and institutions. While elections may still occur, they could be rigged or manipulated, with opposition parties stifled, sidelined, or co-opted. Checks and balances might be undermined, with courts and regulatory bodies losing their independence and coming under the influence of hidden powers. Freedom of speech, assembly, and the press could be curtailed, either through overt laws and regulations or more subtle forms of intimidation and self-censorship. Journalists investigating corruption or abuses of power might find themselves harassed, threatened, or silenced, while protests and opposition movements could be disproportionately targeted and suppressed. The intertwining of political and economic power could become evident, with key industries or resources controlled by a small elite. Cronyism and corruption might become widespread, with the lines between government and business becoming increasingly blurred. Policies and regulations may consistently favor a specific group or interest, regardless of the broader public good. A shadow autocracy would likely operate with a significant lack of transparency and accountability. Decisions might be made behind closed doors, with little or no public scrutiny or input. Attempts to investigate or challenge these decisions could be stonewalled, and whistleblowers could be silenced or discredited. Propaganda and disinformation campaigns could be used to manipulate public opinion and create a facade of popular support. This might involve controlling or influencing media outlets, spreading false or misleading narratives, and using social media and other technological tools to amplify certain voices and suppress others. The rule of law might be selectively applied, with allies and insiders enjoying impunity, while opponents are selectively targeted and persecuted. Legal mechanisms could be used as tools to punish dissent rather than uphold justice, and the legal system itself might become a weapon in the hands of those in power. Over time, the cultural norms and values that underpin democracy might begin to erode. This could manifest in a growing acceptance or even endorsement of autocratic behaviors, a decline in civic engagement and public trust, and a fraying of the social fabric that holds democratic societies together. Clearly, a shadow autocracy governing behind the facade of democracy would be characterized by a complex and interwoven set of signs and symptoms. While the idea might seem far-fetched, history and contemporary examples show that democratic forms can be hollowed out and subverted from within. Recognizing and responding to these signs requires vigilance, critical analysis, and a commitment to the principles and practices that make genuine democracy possible. It's a scenario that calls for active engagement from citizens, institutions, and the international community to guard against the covert slide into autocratic rule. Historical transitions between democratic and autocratic rule offer valuable lessons and insights that can be applied to contemporary challenges. These transitions are often complex and multifaceted, influenced by a wide array of political, economic, social, and cultural factors. Analyzing these historical patterns can help us understand the underlying dynamics and guide present-day responses. One lesson from history is the importance of being vigilant in protecting democratic norms and institutions. Transitions to autocracy often begin with subtle erosions of democratic values and the undermining of checks and balances. Contemporary societies must recognize these early signs and respond proactively to defend democratic principles. Economic disparities and a lack of social cohesion often contribute to political instability. Ensuring that economic growth is inclusive, and addressing grievances and inequalities can create a more resilient democratic environment. Policies that promote social welfare, economic opportunity, and equal access to resources can be vital in maintaining democratic stability. Civil society organizations and a free press have historically played crucial roles in both resisting autocratic tendencies and supporting democratic transitions. Investing in and protecting these vital parts of society can act as bulwarks against authoritarianism. Strengthening journalism, supporting grassroots organizations, and encouraging civic participation are key components of a resilient democracy. International alliances, treaties, and organizations can have a significant impact on domestic governance. Collective action and international solidarity can support democratic movements and put pressure on autocratic regimes. The global community must recognize its role and responsibility in supporting democratic transitions and standing against autocracy. The quality of political leadership and the broader political culture can significantly shape democratic prospects. Cultivating leaders who are committed to democratic values and fostering a political culture that values dialogue, compromise, and respect for the rule of law can help sustain democratic governance. Transitions between different forms of governance are delicate and fraught with risks. Careful planning, inclusive dialogue, and attention to potential sources of conflict or division are essential during these transitional periods. The experiences of countries that have navigated these transitions successfully offer lessons in how to manage change without descending into chaos or authoritarianism. As a matter of fact, each society's historical, cultural, and socio-political context is unique, and there is no one-size-fits-all approach to fostering democracy or preventing autocracy. A deep understanding of local conditions, careful analysis of historical patterns, and a willingness to engage with complexity are essential for crafting effective strategies. Without a doubt, history's transitions between democratic and autocratic rule offer a rich tapestry of lessons that are highly relevant to contemporary challenges. Whether it is maintaining vigilance in the protection of democratic norms, addressing underlying economic and social issues, supporting civil society, or fostering a healthy political culture, these historical insights provide valuable guidance. The key to applying these lessons lies in a nuanced and contextual understanding of the present situation, informed by a critical engagement with the past. It requires a commitment to the principles of democracy, a willingness to learn from history, and a proactive and holistic approach to governance.